Welcome everyone to today's Tech Talk, Sowing the Seeds for a More Creative Society. We're very pleased to have Mitchel Resnick with us today. He is a professor of learning research at the MIT Media Laboratory. He's also head of their Lifelong Kindergarten research program. Right. And in that program, they've worked very closely with Mattel and other companies to get the technologies out into the world. Mitch also was co-founder of the Computer Clubhouse, which is a project that helps low-income youth get access to creative technologies. Recently, Mitch has been looking at sort of the transition from kind of like the 1990s knowledge society to what he calls the creative society. So today he's going to discuss some of the technologies and research going on at MIT Media Lab that will help us with that transition. Please join me in welcoming Mitch Resnick.
Well, it's really nice to be here, and I want to thank Jeff for hosting. We intersected a number of years ago in a previous job of his where we'd also worked on some projects involving technology and education. And it's nice to be able to connect again and explore ways we might be able to connect with Google around some of these ideas. I also feel like I have lots of connections here. These days it seems that every MIT computer science student who graduates wants to come work at Google. So we have lots of people from MIT who are now roaming the halls here. Since, as Jeff mentioned, I do a lot of work with technology and education. So we're going to start out with a quiz. So I hope you came prepared. So get your pencils ready. And it's one of those quizzes that's of the form, which of these three things is not like the other? They ask this on Sesame Street all the time. So I'm going to name three things, and you have to think about which of these three things is not like the other. And the three things are television, computer, and paintbrush. Now, with an audience like this, you probably already know what it is I'm getting at. But I often ask this question when I start to talk with teachers as they're thinking about using computers. And when I talk to groups of educators and ask this, as you can probably tell from the idea behind this, there's one obvious choice that teachers will often say, well, it seems that the paintbrush doesn't quite fit. And it's certainly true that computers and television are similar in many ways. They're both inventions of the 19th century, of the 20th century. They both involve electronic technology. They're both great technologies for disseminating information, where the paintbrush really isn't like them in any of those dimensions. But I think the main point that I want to be making today is that we're not going to be able to make good use of computers, especially computers for learning and education, until we start thinking of computers more like paintbrushes and less like televisions, less as technologies for disseminating information, and more as technologies for personal expression, being able to sort of design and create things with it the way you do with the paintbrush. So, well, unfortunately, that's not the way most technology and computers get out to the world today in the world of education. If you go to most schools where computers have been used, they generally are used more like televisions than like paintbrushes. They generally are used for just distributing and delivering information. And you might wonder, well, why is it that it happens that way? I do think one of the reasons it happens that way is because of the way people think about education. People tend to think about education with a model somewhat like this. They think of education in terms of this sort of a delivery or a transmission model, that education is about delivering information from one person to another. So then when the computer comes along, if people have this model of learning, they say, oh, that's great. We'll just sort of replace that person up there with a computer and have it deliver the information. And that is the way that a lot of computers get used in education and in homes and in community centers these days. And this is what we sort of need to move away from. We've seen over and over in our research, and everyone in doing educational research sees that a lot of the most important learning doesn't happen this way of just delivering information from one person to another, or from a computer to a person, or from a more knowledgeable to a novice. That's not the way most learning happens. The most learning, and some of the most important learning, happens when people are deeply engaged with designing things, creating things, experimenting, exploring, expressing themselves as you do with a paintbrush. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how is it that we could use new technology to fit those approaches that we know are most successful for learning, that involve designing, creating, experimenting, exploring. As we've done that, we look around and say, well, what can we use for inspiration? What are models out there that are already working well where we might get some inspiration and use as a model? And one of the models that we've often been inspired by is looking at the way that kindergartens work. So this is my prototypical kindergarten. And in fact, most people feel that the traditional kindergarten works pretty well. People complain a lot about the educational system, but people generally feel kindergarten works pretty well. And they're right. I think the tradition and preschool sort of leading up to it. And in fact, at least people used to think kindergarten works okay. You might have seen Newsweek magazine had a cover story a few weeks ago that was called The New First Grade. And it was about first grade and kindergarten, of how first grade and kindergarten that used to be places for exploration, experimentation, are becoming much more like the rest of school. So in fact, what's happening is the model of the rest of school, which is much more transmission-oriented, of people sitting there getting lectured at, filling out worksheets, is drifting down into first grade and kindergarten with high-stakes tests, benchmarks every other week. So the rest of the school approach is drifting down towards kindergarten. What we want to do is exactly the opposite. We want to take what has been best about kindergarten through the years and push that upward to make all of school somewhat more like kindergarten. In fact, as Jeff said, my own research group, we call it lifelong kindergarten for that reason. We want to take what's worked well about kindergarten and make it extend through all of the different ages. And in fact, the fact that kindergarten works that way is not just an accident. The person who invented the first kindergarten, kindergarten was an invention, and it was invented a little less than 200 years ago by a German educator and designer named Froebel. And when he set up the first kindergarten, he didn't just say, well, let's make a school for younger kids. He also tried to rethink what the educational approach was going to be. As I said, he wasn't just an educator, he was a designer. And he thought, what can we design to put in the hands of 5-year-olds that will enable them to learn the things that are important for 5-year-olds to be learning? So he designed what came to be known as Froebel's gifts. And these were different manipulative materials, blocks and balls and beads and tiles. And he thought about how could he design those so that kids, just as they play and build and design with those materials, will naturally learn the important things for 5-year-olds to learn. They'll learn about number and shape and size and color. And this was really effective. And the ideas got picked up by later educators. Probably many of you know about Maria Montessori, who was very influenced by Froebel and took this as a basic idea behind her approach that spread widely. And others have also been very influenced by this. And if you walk into kindergartens today, you often will see current-day descendants of Froebel's gifts, different manipulative materials. But as I said, it then starts to change as you get up and as you get to the older grades. Kids don't have the opportunity to experiment, explore, design, create, and it's much more into that tradition, that transmission model. Well, why is it that it happened that way? Is it just no one's thought about this? I don't think it's just that. I do think part of the reason that the education has shifted as kids get older is because we haven't had the right materials and technologies to extend the kindergarten approach. Because if you have blocks and beads and tiles, those are great for learning kindergarten concepts about number and shape and size and color. But when you get to be 10 years old or 15 years old or 25 years old or 45 years old, and if all you have are blocks and tiles, it's not going to let you design the things you want to design or to learn the things that you want to learn. But this is where, in my mind, new technologies can make a big difference. That with new technologies, there's a chance, if we design them the right way and use them the right way, that we can design the technologies that can extend the kindergarten approach and allow learners of all ages to use this kindergarten approach of designing, creating, experimenting, exploring, but to work on more advanced projects and to learn more sophisticated ideas. So that's the real goal of our research group, and for a lot of the work going on in the education area at the Media Lab, it's to say, how can we develop this new generation of technologies based on the kindergarten approach, but useful for learners of all ages to help them learn more advanced things using these types of approaches. So to be more concrete, I'll give an example. We've been developing for a number of years what might be called Invention Kits for kids. We've worked closely with the LEGO toy company on the what led to LEGO Mindstorms. Probably a lot of you have heard of LEGO Mindstorms. Actually, how many of you have ever used LEGO Mindstorms? So probably half the people. In your class. So it's unfair. Hopefully people will use it elsewhere as well. So people have used this, and it's great that this has gotten out to the world in a significant way. There are a million of these that have gotten around the world. for letting people design and build things and learn important ideas, getting beyond the kindergarten concepts, but to learn ideas about feedback and control and sensing by building things in the world and building different robotic systems with this. At MIT, this has turned into a big part, an important part of the educational landscape. Every January, there's a robot design competition. It also gets used in many other, similar things in many other places. But maybe you've probably seen things like this, but I'll just show a little clip. This is from about 10 years ago, before Mindstorms came out. But a colleague of mine, Fred Martin, who worked with our group in developing some of the prototypes for this, he and some other colleagues, Randy Sargent and others, set up the initial robot design contest at MIT, where the month of January between semesters, people would use the early prototypes of this to build robots that compete in competitions. Let me just show a little bit of this. Oops. And again, people will build it, and then these are autonomous robots. People will build a robot, and in this case, the idea is to get ping pong balls to the other side of the table. So you see the top one here knock 2 balls over, and then trap that one on the other side. So that was a pretty effective strategy. The robot on the bottom here actually picks up the balls and throws them to the other side. Again, MIT students have a variety of different mechanical expertise. It's throwing the balls to the other side. I mentioned Fred Martin did his PhD dissertation showing how and what people learn by participating in this and how they learn certain engineering ideas better through these types of hands-on interdisciplinary design activities compared to traditional engineering approaches. You see, while this one's been throwing balls across, the other one's been picking up the balls and bringing them back across. As you can see, at MIT, there's a great spectator sport. They fill up auditoriums hours ahead of time. I like to say this is the MIT equivalent of the big football weekend, because the MIT football team is not so great. But again, as we were developing this, although it's great to work for MIT students, our real goal is to see how it could reach out more broadly. So we're very happy as this became a commercial product, we were able to set up things like this for younger kids all over the world. So like, here's images from in Singapore, where I visited Singapore. These were some kids participating in their robot design competition. This was the national champion, I think he was 13 years old, of their robot competition. So it's really getting out there. Although I was struck, the thing that I remember most from visiting in Singapore, I thought he and his classmates were doing very creative things with the robot. But then when I talked to the teacher, I told her I was impressed with what the kids were doing. It seemed they were learning a lot. But I said I was curious, how is it that they integrated this into their curriculum? And she looked at me as if I was crazy. She said, we would never do this during the school day. This is only for after school. During the day, they must be drilled on their, on their math lessons. And to me, it sort of shows the resistance of the educational system, where there's no doubt this is an incredibly rich learning experience, and yet educational systems still, it's very difficult to bring about change. They have the traditional ways of doing things, and trying to bring about change is very difficult. And this is even in Singapore. I had been invited there because the Ministry of Education wanted to bring about more creative thinking into the classroom, because they'd been getting a lot of complaints from businesses in Singapore. As you might know, the schools in Singapore have been very successful in the international math and science exams. They scored near the top of the world in international math science exams. And yet, when the kids graduate and go into the business world, the businesses were complaining that the students, even those that scored so high, weren't able to come up with innovative solutions to unexpected problems. They knew how to do certain things by rote, but they had no idea how to develop innovative or creative approaches. So they said, we need something different in the school system. And the Ministry of Education was trying to bring about that change. And they sponsored events like this, but you could also see the resistance of the school system. And you see this around the world. And there's this growing gap, in my mind, between what's needed to succeed in the world these days, to be able to think creatively, and what it is that schools are preparing kids for. And I think there's this real problem with the growing gap. And I think what we're trying to do is to bridge that gap, to try to change the educational system so it really does meet the needs of what people need today to be successful in their work lives, and also satisfied in their personal lives and good participants in their civic lives. Although this has been very successful with Mindstorms getting out to the world, there are some ways in which we were frustrated by the way it got out there. As I said, it got out in pretty big numbers, more than 1 million kits sold around the world. But if you go to a lot of the robot design competitions, a lot of the participants are boys. Even when there have been very strong efforts to broaden who it is that who gets involved, there have been 70% participants are boys, even after those strong efforts. Now, it's not to say that some girls aren't doing very well in these competitions. Some are very, very interested. But we just see this around the world, the way that it gets presented. And we don't think it's inherent to the technology. We think it's much more in the way it gets presented. If you say, build a robot to compete in this competition, it's going to appeal to some kids more than other kids. I think a lot of kids want to make things and design things in the world. Not everybody wants to make robots that participate in competitions. So what we wanted to do is to have a more general purpose invention toolkit that lets you design all sorts of things. So with that in mind, what we've been doing in recent years is developing what we call a Cricket, which is similar to the LEGO Mindstorms. This is the little computer. And again, it's smaller and lighter, which has some advantages. You'll see this. You can make it a little bit more portable. But more important, it doesn't just drive motors that are in robots, but can control lights and music and sound in order to control lots of different things in the world. So kids can build things like this. They might build a little cat. And with a cat, when you pet the cat, well, then meow. So this is one, the kids that built this, they put a light sensor in the back and then wrote a program for the Cricket that says when the light level drops below a certain amount, play the meowing sound. And again, if you walk into toy stores these days, you see lots of toys where something will meow when you pet it or wiggle its ears when you talk to it. But it's been pre-programmed by the toy company. And all kids get to do is interact with it. And we have no doubt that the designers of the toy company learned a great deal while they were designing the toy. But our concern is that the kids don't necessarily learn that much just by interacting with the toy. Because we think the learning goes on when you're designing it and programming it. So we want to give that activity to the kids. So they can make things like the cat, or here's another example, where there's a birthday cake. And it has sort of a flashing candle. And when I blow out the candle, it plays a birthday song. So in this case, there's a sound sensor that's built in. And when you blow into it, the sound sensor heard the sound of my breath, and the program says to turn off the light and then to play the music. I should point out we even have someone who worked on the Crickets from the early stages, now works at Google. Chris Line, who's sitting in the back there, was actually, when he was a student at MIT, did a lot of the early work as we were developing all the different types of devices that can connect to the Cricket. So over the years, we had lots of people trying to think how this can be a general purpose tool that you connect all sorts of things to. Let me just show real briefly what it is that kids do is they want to create something like the cat or the birthday cake. So to the computer, you can connect up, this is just into the USB port. We have a USB serial cable that's going to hooked up to an infrared beaming device. So you can beam out information from the computer. And then there's the programming language. And if I take the Cricket and I plug in something like I have it's a light that can be controlled from the Cricket. So I plug this into the Cricket, put it next to the beaming device, and in the programming language, you see there's a block here that says set the light color. I can then change what color it is. Let's say I want to make it blue. I go to blue, and then when I double click, the light turns blue. If I want to turn it red, I just put it down to red, double click, and the light turns red. I can build up programs just by doing stacks of blocks. So I could say, let's say I want to turn it blue, wait a little bit. They just snap together like Lego bricks. Let's say I then want to make it turn back to red and then wait a little bit more. So now when I double click there, oops, it'll go blue and then the red. If I want to do it again, I just hit the button, it goes blue and then red. Or if I want to do that a certain number of times, you can put different control structures. I could say I want to repeat 10 times. So now it'll continuously go blue and red and blue and red. Or I could put on a sound sensor. and say I actually want to trigger that. I say I want to wait until, again, it just snaps together. Again, we want to get rid of a lot of the syntax of traditional programming languages. We found that one of the things that really stops novices from getting started in programming is where do you put the parentheses and the square brackets. Here we have things only fit together in ways that make sense to fit together. So you see the different shapes indicates different types, and things only fit where they can make sense. And people can just sort of scan the different things and try to look for what it is that they might be able to add to it. So like here we might say I'm going to wait until, I'll put a greater than, I would say wait till the loudness from the sound sensor is greater than, I'll say 90. They all go. Oops. It triggered as I was doing it, so I'll start it again. Start. So it's just waiting until it heard a loud sound and then starting what it was doing. And then similarly, in addition to controlling the light, I'll just show one more thing. You can put on sound and say, I want to oops. Click this, plays a kitten sound, or this one has a horse sound, or there's a melody editor where I can make my own little melody. This is how the birthday song was made, and try it out. And if I like that, I say OK, and then it created a block with my melodies. Now, it basically created a procedure of the melody. And then I can also say I want to change what instrument is playing the procedure. So that was with the piano. Now it's a flute. Or I can change the instrument to the kitten. Again, so the idea is to make it, the term we use is we want to have a very tinkerable programming language. In most programming languages, you can't just mess about. You have to sort of think much more formally about it and plan ahead. Our idea is to not think that you have to sort of plan it, write it, compile it, and then run it. It's much more like playing with Lego bricks. And we want to just have, and you know, so I just have these other blocks scattered on my desktop, like with Lego bricks on desktop, and I can work on a little bit of something here, work on a little bit of something there, snap them together. So make it very easy for people to play around with programming. So we've been trying this out in a variety of different places. Actually, it's just recently this came out. We've been working on this for a number of years. It just recently came out as a product from a small company called Playful Invention Company, where you get the Cricket, 4 different types of sensors, 4 different output devices, motors, music sound devices, a digit display, colored lights, along with some Lego materials, art materials, to build the type of things that I've been showing. And we've been trying it out in lots of different places so that, here, this is one of the early things. This was one of our early tests in Boston as we worked on this. This is for kids where they were at a workshop where we told them that the goal was to invent something that could be useful to them in their everyday lives. So if you're thinking about what were they interested in their everyday lives, and how could they use this technology to do things in their everyday lives. So here's what they come up with. This is the local TV station came at the end of a 2-week workshop. So they worked on this for 2 weeks over the summer, and this is what they came up with.
Yeah, see? It just beeps.
Christina Costa is trying to build a better mouse trap. Make that gerbil trap.
Every time they want to go inside this gerbil house, they press this light sensor.
It's one of the many inventions created at this free math and science camp run by the Computer Museum and the Girl Scouts, where girls from Boston are devising everything from an odometer for rollerblades to a diary security system.
When someone touches this to try to open the diary, it'll take a picture of that person.
So like if your creepy little brother tries to read your diary?
Yeah.
He's on camera.
Yes.
So I think you see just from those examples the range of inventiveness which is possible when you give kids the right tools and the right support. I think one reason this was so successful is that they really worked on things that they really cared about personally. The girl who did the rollerblade, she loved rollerblading. So she was working on something she cared about, and she wanted to know how fast she was going. So after she put the sensor on the wheel, the sensor told her revolutions per second, but she wanted to know how fast she was going in miles per hour. So she was motivated to do the math to figure out how fast she was going in miles per hour. And we see this over and over with, here just a few more examples from workshops around the world. This is in Hong Kong, we did workshops, and he worked on a portable jukebox where you put in a coin, there was a sensor to detect what type of coin, and it played different music. So it was a budding entrepreneur. She wanted to have her boots light up the same way that some sneakers light up now as you walk. So she put lights inside those ping pong balls with a sensor on her shoe, and as she would walk, they would light up different colors in different ways. This is a workshop in Iceland. This was a security system for her room with a light beam that gets broken and sounds an alarm if someone comes into her room. This was, everyone needs one of these. It was an automatic toilet paper dispenser. So when you clap your hands, it spews out toilet paper for you. And this was actually one of my favorites. This was an alarm clock that was set up with a light sensor. So when the light comes in the room, it will then trigger the light sensor, and it turns on the motor that rustled his hair and played some music to wake him up. But after he developed it, someone asked him, and he said, this is Iceland. The sun usually doesn't come in the window in the morning. So at the final exhibition, when they had posters about it, he wrote at the bottom of his poster, "For export only." So I think so the kids are not just learning the technology, but starting to think about the user community and how to get their ideas out to the world. I think, well, here I'll just show. Kids we also emphasize for kids to think about the whole design process. When we worked on one workshop, actually another MIT researcher ran a workshop where he had kids working with the crickets, and then a week later had some other kids, and he asked the first group to write down some suggestions for the next group, the lessons they learned. What advice would they give the next group about how to design things with this technology? So some of the things that kids came up with, they said things like start simple, work on things that you like. That's always a good idea. Do things that are personally meaningful. If you don't have a clue if you don't have a clue what to do, fiddle around. Again, messing about is often a good strategy. Don't be afraid to experiment. Find a friend to work with. Share ideas. The importance of collaboration. It's okay to copy stuff to give an idea. Too often in school, kids are told not to copy. It's good to copy. I mean, give appropriate credit, but most inventions come by copying. Keep your ideas. Build, take apart, rebuild. The idea of iterative design. Lots of things go wrong. Stick with it. The importance of persistence. So I think we're hoping that kids aren't just learning specific technical skills, but also about the process of design. Another project that we're working on that's in the same spirit, whereas the crickets are trying to let kids design things in the physical world and make them come to life. We also want to let kids take control of the media that they interact with. Today's kids grow up doing lots of things with media on the screen, but usually they just, again, are interacting with the media. They go to a web page, they move their mouse around, letters dance, and different fireworks go off, but they never get to create those things themselves. Even kids that become fairly savvy with computers and use paint programs or even use Photoshop to manipulate some photographs, it's usually making static images. It's not so easy for people to grow up and to make dynamic, interactive things. So we really want to give kids the opportunity to make dynamic, interactive things on the screen, like the things they see, and like the physical things they can do with crickets, but with it, but again, do it on the screen. So we've been developing a programming language we call Scratch for that purpose. Let me give you an example of this. So with Scratch, it's the same building block metaphor that I showed before. This is a top-down view of a cat. You can then drag out blocks. This says to move 10 steps. We'll make the cat move. Those of you who at some point in your childhood did things with Logo, the programming language, will see some things about moving a turtle on the screen. You can start with the same sorts of things, but more easily, since these graphical blocks, don't worry about syntax. But more importantly, you can go much further. So again, you can do things. You can make it turn. You can put them together so it moves and turns. You can bring out control structures so you can tell it to go forever. And again, things snap in place. So go forever. But again, most kids today aren't so interested in just making a cat or a turtle move on the screen. They want to manipulate media. So this is really meant as a media authoring tool. So I can do things. Instead of the cat, I can give it a different costume. I can say I want to import a costume. I can just grab it from a web page. Oh, I forgot to. Actually, I didn't have the image here that I wanted. Well, let's just take one of these. So here's a character that I brought in. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Oops. But now I sort of want to manipulate this image. I can do things like, of course, I can make it spin around like I had the cat spin around. But I want to do things like kids do in Photoshop. So I can do things like I can manipulate. These are different types of image filters you would find in Photoshop. This is a whirl filter. And I could say when I click on this, it whirls the face and twists it around. But then, I want to be able to go beyond that and be able to do it interactively. So I can do things like I want to say I want to continuously set the whirl filter based on the X position of the mouse. So now just with a few blocks, I've made an interactive application. That as I move the mouse around, I can control the image on the screen. Then even if it's running, I could say I want the Y position of the mouse to control, say, the color. So now as I go up and down, you change the color, and left and right, it whirls it. So just the idea of being able to do these simple interactive animations are things that traditionally aren't very easy to do these days. But there's no reason it shouldn't be easy. Just be able to put a few different things together and to be able to do those type of interactive applications. I'll show you the type of things that people can do. Right now, this is still a beta version. This is a project that we're planning to have this downloadable by the end of this year. We're going to have this downloadable for free from the net to let people create things like this. So in this case, each of these objects, here you have lots of different objects. Each one has its own code associated with it, its own stack of blocks. So I can look to see the stack of blocks associated with each of these. It happens like this boombox is set up that when I click it, it makes the dancer start dancing. Each of these, when I click on it, hey, hey. So you can do different things to the dancer, apply different image effects, different sound effects. So again, we want to let people mix different media together. In fact, we call the language Scratch because it's inspired by the way DJs scratch with music. They take existing pieces of music, blend them together in different ways, and mess around with them. So we want to let kids mess around with media, but to learn programming ideas in the process. So the goal is to help people design things they want to design more flexibly, to learn computational ideas, which have been difficult to learn in the past, and also to learn about the process of design. I'll show one more example. Certain kids, when they see this, they want to do it to create games. So the type of games they might make. Here's an example. So like this is one where, again, there's a big fish and little fish. Each one has its own programs. The big fish is programmed to follow the mouse. And the goal is to eat the fish, the little fish. And in fact, when I saw the kid who was working on a project just like this one, and he got to this stage, but what he wanted to do was to keep score. And he didn't know how to keep score. So I showed him, I said, well, what you can do is there's a category here called variables. I say I want to make a variable. I'll call it score. That automatically generates 3 new blocks called change score by set score to, and it shows up the score here on the screen. So if I click on change score by 1, it increments the score right there. So that was what he wanted to do. And I started to show him you could just drag this out and put it in the program when the big fish eats the little fish. And his eyes lit up. He saw what he could do. When he reached out his hand, he said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And what crossed my mind was I wondered how many 8th grade algebra teachers are ever thanked by their students for teaching them about variables. And it just doesn't happen. But here, he was learning about variables in a way that he really cared about. He wanted to make use of it. And I think this is the way that we want to have mathematical and scientific and engineering ideas introduced to kids in a context where they really want to make use of it, see how it can be used, and then be able to use it as part of design projects. So as I said, this is something we've been testing it out in a few different places, and are now ready to get out to the world. But a big part of getting out to the world is not just have the software. We want to make a community around it. We've been very influenced by websites like Flickr, where people get to put their own photographs up, and you get to learn from seeing other people's photographs. Or YouTube, where you put videos. And it's not just to get your stuff to be seen by the world, but you can learn from what you see other people's doing. So influenced by things like Flickr, we're creating a website that at least tentatively we've been calling Scratcher. So you can put up your own Scratch projects, and then, and then other people can see it, but you also can browse and look at other people's projects. Once you put it up there, you can actually run it in the browser itself. You can't author in the browser, but if you have any Java-enabled browser, we put it in a form where you can just run the project right in the browser. So I think we want to be able to move much more in the direction of letting people make computationally active creations that they can just run in the browser. In fact, it's always a frustration for me. It seems that there's so much stuff being done by people here at Google in particular of making more things you can do in the browser, but there's still not so much about enabling you to create computationally active things, dynamic interactive things within the browser. I think the direction we want to go with this is, as I said, right now we can't author in the browser itself, but you should be able to do things like that. The same way that in Scratch, being able to make the type of music animation or that game, one should be able to just make easy ways for people to author things like that right in the browser, share with one another in sites like this. And it sort of feels to me that I wish there were more people working on that. That's the type of thing that would be great to try to work with people here and be able to move some of this to be able to do this totally within the browser and to let people be able to not just take videos and photographs, but also make computationally dynamically active things that they then share with one another. Of course, it shouldn't just run on laptops or desktop machines. We've been working on versions of this that run on cell phones, PDAs. And again, there we probably aren't going to be authoring on the cell phone. But what you can do is you can design it on your laptop, download it to your cell phone, but then just send it to other people on their cell phones. One of my graduate students is interested in studying how the creations get shared with each other. So as you send it from one cell phone to another or online from one person to another, it keeps track of where it's been spread to. So you can get a sense of how ideas spread through the network. And we want to expose that to kids as well, or adults who use this, so they get a sense of the social network that they're part of and really can track how the things they've created have spread to each other. Again, I think cell phones are also particularly good for doing this. We want to make this active and just use the microphones that are in every cell phone, cameras that are increasingly in cell phones, so that kids can create things. In fact, this example, which is modeled after the physical birthday cake, when you get on your cell phone, the candles are flickering, and you use the microphone when you blow into your cell phone and then puts out the candles and plays the song. So you should be able to create your own little animated greetings like that and send it to other people is the direction we're hoping to go. I want to end up by talking a little bit about how we're trying to get these ideas out to the world, because it's not just enough to make the technologies. We're working hard on technologies like the Crickets and Scratch. But we also want to make sure that these ideas and technologies get out to the world and to reach everybody in the world, not just you just put this online, it's going to reach a thin slice of people. And we really want to try to make sure that it reaches people from all walks of life, in all different parts of society. And towards that end, we've been working on a project for more than a decade now called the Computer Clubhouse, which is a network of after-school centers for young people from low-income communities where they can come and learn to design and create things with computers and express themselves creatively. So it's not just about getting access to technology, but to learn to express themselves creatively with the technology. So we have kids doing things like one of the first kids who came to the very first clubhouse, which was in Boston. He came and he hadn't used, his name was Mike, he hadn't used computers before. But one of the first things he did, he loved to draw. So we showed him how we could just draw and then scan it in. So this is one of the first things he did. It was drawn by hand, scanned in. He only used the computer for adding color. And we think that's a good way to get started. Start with something you know and use the computer just to add a little bit to it. By a few weeks later, he was doing things like this, where he was adding layering and things that he couldn't have done by hand on paper. So he was starting to take greater advantage of the computer. But I think what was most important was, by a few weeks later, other kids in the clubhouse had discovered what he was doing. They really liked what he was doing and came to him for advice. So this assignment was done by other kids, but they said, we learned how to do this from Mike. And that gave Mike a great sense of pride because he was doing some things that other people cared about. No one had come to him for advice before like this. He even changed his own artwork, where initially, he was doing a lot of things with gang imagery, with guns and knives. And then he saw he was 16 at the time, and he saw 10-year-olds copying that. And he said, they shouldn't be doing that. So he changed his own artwork because he saw himself having a role of responsibility in the community. He went on to doing, these are some collages that he did. He did some things that were somewhat more political. He actually even got a job at a local company designing graphics for their website. So something that enabled him to get a job and sort of benefit economically, financially. But in my mind, what was most important was not just the financial economic side, but the fact that he saw that he could play a role in the community. There was a purpose to what he was doing. And he sort of started to feel that there was a role to play. He'd come in pretty alienated from the rest of society, and now he saw there was a role that could be played. The great educator, philosopher John Dewey had a line about education I always liked. He said the goal of education is not just learning to make a living, but learning to make a life. And I think that's what Mike was doing, he was learning how to make a life. So we've been trying to, from the success of the first clubhouse, we teamed up with Intel to sort of spread these clubhouses around the world. We now have more than 100 clubhouses in 20 countries around the world, where kids do all sorts of things. This is in Mexico City, where in the middle of every clubhouse there's a green table where kids work with physical stuff, with glue guns and balsa wood. When I was visiting the clubhouse in Mexico City, they were taking apart some electronic device to get a motor and making a plane. But I liked the fact that across the clubhouse, from where these kids were making a physical plane, another kid was using 3D Studio Max in order to do a 3D rendering of a plane. And I like the fact of kids being able to use lots of different media, physical and online media, to be able to create things in the world. This was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I was visiting. They were making costumes for themselves and making a video that they were then editing. This is in Taiwan, where they're making New Year's cards when I was visiting. This is in Jordan, in Amman, Jordan, where she was trading different projects on the intranet that connects all the clubhouses. We made an intranet where kids at different clubhouses could share projects with each other. In fact, this intranet has been very successful, but I also have to give a special thank you to just recently, Google agreed to donate a Google search appliance for us because we want to expand this clubhouse, so we really need a Google search appliance. With the help of Jeff and others, we were able to get a Google search appliance to be able to expand the village to really help kids in different clubhouses be able to share and find each other's work online. This is in India, in Delhi, where this is a 13-year-old who was using a microscope where you can put things in the microscope and get to see it on the screen enlarged and then compare different images. He had brought in a little vial of water from home, and we looked at it under the microscope. He was really disturbed by what he saw because he saw all this junk in it. So that led him to start to look around, what is it that, how does water get handled in the community? And this was a community with no indoor plumbing. So he went around, these are photos he took, and he sort of investigated how is it that water is gathered. So typically the women in the community go with jugs, gather water, not the most sanitary of conditions. He went around and they did surveys asking people, how do you store your water? How do you treat your water? He gathered lots of samples. You see all the water samples there to see. And he and a friend sort of evaluated. They learned about it. They found out at least one thing you can do is boil the water. So he proudly showed me in his home where he had now convinced his parents where you should boil the water. So in this case, he really felt that something he learned at the clubhouse was something that he could really affect his family's health in the short term. Now, not everybody gets to that point. It's not always something that can really affect your health or welfare in the short term. But I think what's most important is trying to give kids a sense that they really can make a difference in the world, that by the things that they experiment with, things they create, it's not just the world. They don't have to just be passive in the world and wait for something to happen to them. But they can take advantage of new technologies, like with a paintbrush, and be able to sort of get their own ideas out to the world. And I think that's what we're trying to do, both with the technologies we do, with the different types of settings that we're doing, projects that have spun out from the Media Lab. Google actually has been a supporter of the $100 laptop project you probably know of that was started by the founder of the Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte, that is based on some of these same ideas about trying to get technology out there to let people express themselves more creatively by putting new technologies in their hands. And I think what we're trying to do with that is to switch around, as Jeff was saying in the introduction, to shift the way people think about the society. That it's not just a matter of how can you get information. As important as information is, just giving people access to information isn't enough. I think what we want to really look at is how can they make use of that information to be able to get their ideas out to the world. Because we think increasingly it's becoming clear to us that success in the future, whether it's for an individual, for a community, for a company, or for a country as a whole, is going to be based not on what you know or even how much you know, but rather the ability to think and act creatively with the things, with the information and knowledge that you have. And that's really what's going to make the difference. So our hope is that through some of these technologies and outreach programs, we're able to help prepare young people so they're better prepared for that creative society that they're growing up into. So we'd love to find ways to work together with Google to try to see how we could join forces. As projects like Scratch come out, I've started to talk to some people here how we might try to help get that out and put into kids' hands, and to just have more ways for kids to use the technology that is increasingly ubiquitous. It is getting in the hands of kids, but it's not just a matter of getting in the hands of kids, but making sure that they use the technology in a way that's going to prepare them to be able to have full, satisfying lives in ways that they can really contribute to the society around them. Thanks a lot. I'm happy to answer a question or two if you'll have, yeah.
Yeah, so I had a chance to play with Scratch today earlier. I went to look at it, and I found it very interesting because it's not as constraining as Mindstorm. I found when I played with Mindstorm that it was, because I'm a software engineer, I know how to program stuff. I found Mindstorm rather constraining, Scratch a bit better. But you said you want to get Scratch out to lots of people, lots of communities, but I only saw .exe as binaries. Is there an open source project for that?
We're planning to share, right now it's still in beta form, but actually it'd be interesting to get people's input. We're planning to share the source with people who are interested in it. We're not so interested in having people develop all sorts of other forks off of Scratch, because we put a lot of time designing things carefully and to just have a mixture of lots of different Scratch versions out there. We don't necessarily want, we're happy to share the source with anybody who's interested and try to work together to try to add different aspects to it. So if you're interested, feel free to contact us, and eventually, once it's out and freely downloadable, we will put it away that people can download source if they're interested in it.
And the second question, comment was, so you mentioned that a lot of the things that the games and things that kids play with today are, they're sort of interactive, but they're just like pre-canned sort of.
So they just get to interact. They don't get to invent.
Right. But a lot of the games that are available, especially on open source platforms like SuperText is a good example. My kids love to create their own levels of SuperText. Yeah. So they go off and design the different levels and what happens, and they have to think about what's going to happen during play of the game.
Yeah. Well, I do think overall there are things moving in a good direction. There are more things that are customizable. I mean, even just at a minimal stage, just being able to customize with skins. There's little ways in which you get more control. And with games, gradually over time, there's been more to be able to do some general design. But I think there's a lot further that we can go. I mean, I do think there are a lot of things pointing in the right direction. But a lot of times, it's still just giving you a little bit of control. Or when it gives you more control, it's not easy enough for a broad number of people to use it. So I think I agree, there are other things out there trying to do it. There are also other efforts to make sort of full programming languages accessible. We were talking with some people earlier about the Alice project at CMU has some of the same spirit. There are some other things out there, but I think it hasn't caught on as well as it might, and we just want to go further with it. Other questions or thoughts? Suggestions?
So where can you get Scratch, the executable at least right now?
Excuse me?
Where can you
Introduction had a URL.
Okay, yeah, if you go to download the beta, you have to search a little bit. We just put the beta online, but right now we're sort of hiding it away because there's not a lot of good support materials for it.
It wasn't on the website anywhere that I could find.
Yeah, but if you look a little bit, go into the FAQ and it says something like, how do I download Scratch? And you can't find a link there.
Okay.
But later this year, we're going to, again, promote it, make it more visible. Now we sort of only want people to get it if they really want to get it. So if you have trouble finding it, email me.
I'm sure I can find it
from
that link.
On the subject of promoting Scratch and otherwise, it looks like a big part of that is the sharing of user content. What types of interfaces and systems are you currently working on to enable kids from one part of the world to really work with others and share their ideas?
Well, there's both sort of the technological infrastructure and then sort of the community building infrastructure. So
user content creation is a very big thing these days.
Right.
It's only getting bigger.
Right. So again, and this is again, as I said, we're trying to model it after all those other things with user content creation. But even with the growth of user content creation, there isn't very much interactive user-created interactive content. So we're hoping to see this be, giving more capabilities of user-created interactive content is what we're hoping to do. We're trying to hopefully we'll have some infrastructure where both within the Scratch website, but also we're going to make it easy for people to put their Scratch projects inside their MySpace page. So trying to make it easy for you to embed it within other web pages that you're creating. And then different ways of getting it out there. Even though we've tried to make Scratch as easy as we can, and yeah, I think you've got some sense of it. I think it's easier than a lot of traditional languages. It's still not as easy as many other things. So we're trying to get more places that can support helping kids get started with it. So we're trying to team up with different places doing teacher professional development to try to get it into schools, trying to work with after-school centers where it can be introduced. Because I do think for this really to get out there, you are going to need a network of people who can help one another. Some of it can be done online. Again, we certainly hope that we'll build an online community where people have questions, they can ask each other online, see how other people did it. And hopefully that can get pretty far that way, but I think we also still need to build up a physical infrastructure through schools, after-school centers. So we're trying to get started with that as well. So those are different ways we're spreading it.
For something like that, you want to target a viral distribution model.
Yeah.
Have the hot program or animation that someone made be distributed to others, and from there everyone else getting excited about it and wanting to then extend it.
Right. Yeah, I do think people seeing things they want, that they get excited about wanting to do things like that. One thing we're trying to do, we're just getting started now. If anybody's interested in this, feel free. We're going to some people that we see as really great interactive designers. People like Ken Perlin at NYU, Toshio Awai in Japan, who are people who do these beautiful interactive graphic designs and try to get them to do some things in Scratch to show what's possible with these tools, because I think that's one way to inspire people. But then also just saying what a seventh grader saying what a seventh grader in Japan or France or South Africa did, it also can be very inspiring. So hopefully just seeing other things are available. The online community, one thing that always spurred me about the need for that type of online community was with the LEGO programming language, which, as some of you know, got out into schools in a somewhat significant way in the 80s, but then sort of plateaued and has sort of dissipated. Marvin Minsky, the MIT professor and one of the great pioneers in AI, his critique of LEGO and why it didn't really get out there, he said it's a nice grammar, but there was no literature. And I thought it was nice. He sort of said it's not a bad language to work with, but you can't see what other people have done with it. And partly it was out there pre-internet, so there weren't easy ways to see what else is out there and be inspired by what other people have done and to read what other people have done. So I do think we're in a much better position now to create the literature around Scratch. I really do think that's an important part of trying to get out there that will help spark it virally if we get the right things out there. And to try to get certain uses of it, like sending interactive greeting cards. In the early days of the web, when there were the first sites with greeting cards, that really attracted a lot of people to the web when they found out that they could send a greeting card and you could just get a link to see this greeting card. Now we want to have kids make interactive greeting cards, and similarly to make it very easy for them just to send an interactive greeting card to a friend. So things like that, some prototypical uses of Scratch that sort of catch on is one of the things we're hoping to do. But to be perfectly honest, probably we aren't going to come up with the killer ways of doing it. Hopefully, if we get it out there, other people will come up with really creative ways of doing it that will help spread it. That's what we hope. Okay. But anyway, thanks a lot. If people want to find more, there's stuff on the web. If you go to, actually, it's scratch.mit.edu for Scratch. Or the crickets, if they're called PicoCrickets, if you search on that. We also have some little information here about it if you're interested. Thanks a lot.